After attach the interfacing to the collar, draw the finish line on the inside. The interfacing of the under collar must be cut with a bias and then attach it. Draw the fold line on the outer side of the undercollar. Sewing only the undercollar along the line. Mark the location where the collar will sew on the outside of the facing. Sew 1 cm of facing and top collar. Sew on the left side and right side in 2 parts based on the center of the back. Cut only the body side. After sewing, check the collar. Sew the other side similarly. Make sure this time the body plate is on top. Press the seam up. The seam allowances of the fold line are naturally overlapped. The seam allowance at the back of the neck is curved, so cut 2 or 3 places to make it look pretty. Sew the undercollar and bodice in the same way as the top collar and facing. Mark the location where the collar will sew on the outside of the bodice. Sew on the left side and right sides in 2 parts based on the center of the back. Press the seam open. Cut the back neckline seam allowance several times. So 1 centimeter of the top color and under color. So only to the end of the color, not facing. This time we sew the facing part. To prevent the color from being sewn into the facing, cut the seam allowance to the end and sew so that the color and the facing are completely separated. Diagonally cut the angle parts of the collar and facing. Then fold the seam allowance and turn it over to make a pretty collar. And press the front facing seam open. Then iron it again from the outside so that the facing is not visible from the front panel. And from the point where the facing is folded, iron the facing so that it is visible from the front plate. Likewise, when ironing the collar, press the collar seam open. Then iron it so that the undercolor is not visible. Now the collar and facing are moving, but I hand sew the seam allowances so that the collar does not move. Baste the bottom seam allowance of the bodice and the top seam allowance of the facing. At this time, sew from the fold line of the collar to the fold line. Next, make 3 loops on the shoulders to keep the facing from turning over.